Our scripture reading for today comes from Isaiah 9, verses 1 through 7. But there will be no gloom for those who are in anguish. In the former time, he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time, he will make glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor, you have broken, as on the day of Midian. For all the boots of the tramping warriors and all the garments rolled in blood shall be burned as fuel for the fire. For a child has been born to us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His authority shall grow continually, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. He will establish and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. The word of the Lord. Today, Isaiah comes to us with a message of hope for a divided and despairing nation. Israel had once been a mighty, unified country under King David and King Solomon. But now, those glory days are over. After disagreements and political divisions, the country is split into two, one in the north and one in the south, each ruled by an entirely different government. In fact, these divisions are so bad, they've gotten to the point of civil war. The north decides to invade the south for not bowing to its wishes. From the south, we hear Isaiah's voice, heartbroken by the division he sees in the people he loves, and terrified for what the future holds. Instead of one worshiping site in Jerusalem, the northern people worship separately. Family is turned against family as brothers and tribes draw swords against one another in the fight for political power. Isaiah watches in terror as the king of the south allies with the neighboring empire Assyria in order to fight off those Israelite brothers. Isaiah warns him, stop. This can come to no good. Assyria is a brutal empire, one that turns its allies into slaves, that seeks landmass and wealth rather than the good of its subjects, that does not respect the God of Israel. We have heard stories of the Assyrians cutting off the hands and feet of those they conquer, and yet we ask them to fight against our own brothers and tribes. Perhaps this kind of division sounds familiar. While we don't live next to the Assyrian Empire, we have certainly witnessed our share of divisions in our nation. There have always been divides between political parties and between those in power and those at the margins. These tensions and inequalities in the last few years feel like they have ratcheted up exponentially. This week, we have seen the unjust divisions in our legal system, in the way it treats Black and white Americans, threatening the lives of one and letting the other walk free. With the beginning of the pandemic, many of us witnessed fighting break out like we had never seen it before, over masks and vaccines, over personal rights and communal safety, over things as fundamental as who is in power, who has the authority to say what truth is, and the difference between fact and fiction. For many of us, these arguments have split our families in two, causing harsh arguments between parents and children, and even separating us from our loved ones when we can't figure out how to gather safely. These divisions feel especially relevant as the holidays approach, with Thanksgiving this week and Christmas in sight. I know for me, this is a time when I think about my family, the people who are missing, the relationships that have changed, the tensions that now arise when we plan gatherings in light of COVID. In my family, there have been divorces and deaths, as well as harsh divisions over religious and political differences. In particular, I think about my grandmother, who I called Gammy. Yes, that's right, Gammy, not Grammy. Gammy was my closest grandparent who lived in my hometown for much of my childhood and spent many hours hosting me for tea parties with my dolls, bringing me to craft fairs where she sold decorative sprays of flowers in hand-woven baskets, and taking me shopping for my own birthday and Christmas presents. She was there for every Sunday meal and every holiday. Yet there was tension between her and the rest of my family, as she was a liberal Methodist and my family was conservative evangelical. More than that, she struggled with alcoholism, and we spent many days and hours bringing her back and forth to detox and rehab, only to see her spiral again. We wanted so much for her to be healthy and well, and change felt frustrating and impossible. These tensions and anxieties were always in the background of our cheerful family dinners and holiday gatherings. She passed away when I was in high school at age 70 due to the toll the alcohol had taken on her health. I remember feeling angry and confused, wishing things could have been different, wishing we had more time, wishing these tensions hadn't divided us the way they did. At the memorial service, my half-brother went up to speak. He told us how, as her step-grandson, he felt out of place sometimes and wondered what his role was as a non-biological grandson. Did that divide make him less loved? Then he recalled, a few weeks before Gammy died, she ran into him at the grocery store. He wondered how she would respond. They only ever interacted at family gatherings. He was surprised and deeply touched when she hurried over, smiling and thrilled, to give him a huge hug and ask how he was doing. The divisions that he had thought were so important weren't so important after all. Even today, when the holidays roll around, I miss Gammy. I long for a family that is whole, not separated by divisions like religion and politics and the many harms we have done one another, even as I know that many of these divisions have lasting effects that can't be undone so easily. In Israel, this kind of wholeness and healing is what Isaiah is most longing for too. Instead, what he most fears comes to pass. The king of the south doesn't listen to his pleas, and before long, Assyria turns the south, Isaiah's beloved home, into a vassal state, subjecting it to its own laws, taxes, and authority. Not long after, Assyria conquers the north entirely. This tumultuous and devastating period is when Isaiah writes the text that we read for today. In the midst of telling his people how their divisions and power struggles have led to such devastating consequences, he offers a bit of hope. He tells them that the oppression they are experiencing won't last forever. Instead, God will raise up for them a new king, one who will throw off these oppressive forces and allow them to live in peace again. Just the opening lines of the prophecy feel like a breath of fresh air. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. Isaiah promises that the heavy burden that the powerful Assyrian empire has placed on the backs of the oppressed will be lifted. He promises that the blood-stained clothes of the Israelite soldiers, who Assyrians had treated so brutally in battle, will be burned up and left only a memory. He promises this not only to his political faction in the south, but to the north as well, saying that this promise of God's hope stretches out to the Galilee, up the Jordan, all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. What a vision! Isaiah imagines a future where oppressive powers are torn down and justice is restored, where Israel is a united nation again, not split by political and religious differences, but united by their faith in a mighty God. Can you too imagine it? A nation that is not split by divides between conservative and liberal, that does not press the heavy burden of injustice upon the most marginalized? Can you imagine a family that is not waging war against each other, inflicting new harms and reigniting old wounds? It seems likely that Isaiah believes this glorious, united, peaceful future will come to pass under the south's new king, Hezekiah. It is likely that this child, whom Isaiah describes in the text as being born as Israel's new king, refers in fact to Hezekiah, as he is placed fresh and new and full of life and hope upon the throne. In the ancient world, kings acted as representatives or sons of the gods they served. Here are the list of attributes used to describe Hezekiah: wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, are just as much being used to describe Israel's God. The sad end to this story is that Hezekiah was never able to cast off Assyria's power or reunify Israel. Indeed, Israel was never a united nation again. Yet, this prophetic poem that Isaiah wrote to give hope to a divided nation in a dark time has served to bring hope to many in dark times. This hope, of course, is not rooted in Hezekiah's political power, but in the God that he serves. This God is, first, a wonderful counselor. This God has the wisdom, like Solomon, to mediate between divided people and guide them on the best path toward truth. This is a wisdom we can rely on as we struggle to navigate difficult conversations with our families and neighbors about the things that matter most to us. Isaiah next reminds us that this God is a mighty God, one who can overturn even the strongest empires and unjust systems that oppress us. God is not threatened by the political powers that frighten us or the elections that fray our nerves. God is not wringing God's hands over our fights with our partners and our impending holiday gatherings with our families. Then Isaiah tells us that this God is an everlasting Father, one who will protect his people as his own children. For me, this is an especially comforting message when so many of us feel that political divides have separated us from our loved ones. God is a parent who will not turn away from us, who will embrace us as we are and tell us we are loved and not alone. I think if God were to run into us at the grocery store, she would run up to us like a loving grandmother, throw her arms around us, and tell us she's so glad to see us. Finally, this God is described as the Prince of Peace. God brings peace to nations that are so immersed in turmoil, it seems they can never emerge from it. God is actively involved in creating a world where families and groups can live together in harmony, not competing for power, but supporting each other in community. And of course, when most of us think of the Prince of Peace, we think of Jesus. Over the years, the Christian church has read this passage in light of Jesus' coming. Jesus is the light emerging in the darkness. Jesus is the child born to us, whose ultimate reign over the world will result in the endless peace that Isaiah describes. In Christian interpretation, Jesus is the one who delivers our divided nation, who, according to the words of Isaiah, will establish and uphold his kingdom with justice and with righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. As a Christian, this image gives me great hope. We believe in a mighty and wise God, a parent God who embraces those who have been cast aside, who promises to bring peace to a world that is full of division and violence and fear. We believe in a God who chose to put God's self in a human body, the body of a tiny baby, nourished and held by the arms of the people who are part and parcel of these divisions and hurts. We believe that this God is returning again to make all things new and right and just, and that ultimately, this God is the one who reigns over our broken and fractured earth. Imagine it, your family and my family gathered together around an open table where everyone is welcomed and no one is afraid. Imagine it, my grandmother and yours present with us, their health challenges no longer even a frustrated side glance over the Thanksgiving turkey. Imagine it, the real, deep, and lasting peace that God can bring within our relationships, our nation, and our world. This is not a surface-level peace where no one is talking about the tensions below, but the kind of peace that comes from real healing, real wholeness. Like Israel, we may not see this true peace in our lifetimes, yet we know that we are in the hands of a God who is reigning over and healing the world, a God who won't stop until that work is finished. Friends, this is the hope we proclaim every time we say that Christ is King. Let us not lose sight of this hope in dark times. Let us hold to the same hope in the God of Isaiah that Isaiah held to so many years ago. Amen.